By now, you've probably seen the footage, and if you haven't, I'll warn you, you might find it hard to watch. This man with the blue baseball cap handling produce at a grocery store, his shoulder bag is about to explode. You see how much force with which the explosion sprays outwards. That'll become important later. But this man is badly hurt, and there are thousands like him.
Across Lebanon and into Syria, pagers exploding.
Handheld pagers used by Hezbollah members exploded.
Wireless devices exploding in the user's hands.
Hezbollah's news outlet reports these explosions were the result of walkie-talkies.
So let's start with the question, what happened? Across Lebanon on Tuesday at around 3:30 in the afternoon, thousands of pagers exploded almost at the same time, likely tampered with to detonate remotely at the push of a button. The targets? Members of Hezbollah, a designated terror group, sworn enemies of Israel, and increasingly reliant on pagers for communication. Then, a day later, on Wednesday, a similar coordinated attack, this time on Hezbollah walkie-talkies.
For the second day, panic spread across Lebanon as more electronic devices suddenly transformed into bombs.
This presumably Israeli operation is extremely sophisticated, getting not only into the pagers, but then into the walkie-talkies.
This begins to answer the next big question: who would do this? Israel has not taken responsibility for the attack, nor does it tend to, even when it is behind covert attacks like this. But nobody denies Israeli intelligence would certainly be capable of something on this scale. Hezbollah has blamed Israel directly, and of course, the two have been locked in conflict for years, and particularly since the October 7th attacks.
The relationship between Israel and Hezbollah has been extraordinarily tense and always on the precipice of, frankly, another next conflict.
This has really come to a head just in the last 11 months since October 7th, with Hezbollah firing missiles on an almost daily basis into Israel since the day after that attack, since October 8th.
Tonight, Israel says at least a dozen children and teenagers were killed after a rocket hit a soccer field where they were playing.
It may not be a coincidence that just hours before thousands of pager bombs were detonated, Israel's prime minister issued a statement expanding the country's war goals to include returning the residents of the north securely to their homes. Now, that's a reference to Israel's northern border with Lebanon, the front line of its ongoing clashes with Hezbollah. Tens of thousands of Israelis have fled that area because it's too dangerous to stay. And Benjamin Netanyahu has put it in writing. This war isn't just about Gaza and Hamas anymore. It's also about securing the north. And that means addressing the threat to Israel from Hezbollah.
There's significant political pressure that's been growing and has now reached almost an apex in Israel.
Israel may never admit responsibility, but nobody disputes it was behind this. Even the country's defense minister posted online shortly after the attacks began, "We are opening a new phase in the war. The center of gravity is shifting to the north." But on the question, who got hurt in this attack? The answer isn't so straightforward. Members of Hezbollah were undeniably the targets. Hezbollah itself says the pagers belonged to employees of various Hezbollah units and institutions, and it confirmed that at least 8 of its members were killed. Several of the most recent walkie-talkie explosions even happened at a funeral for 3 Hezbollah members who were killed by exploding pagers the day before, according to the Associated Press. But according to Lebanon's health ministry, at least 2 of the 12 people killed in pager explosions were children. Thousands more people were injured, Iran's ambassador to Lebanon among them, and the walkie-talkie bombs the following day are reported to have killed at least 20 additional people, injuring several hundred more than that. What's difficult to know is how many of those who were hurt were members of Hezbollah and how many were civilians. It's impossible to know who was holding which pagers at which times and who was close enough to be hurt when they exploded in very open areas. Streets, markets, public squares.
civilians were injured, but in most cases, they seem to be incidentally around the other members. So in one case, a little girl picked up her father's pager and took it to him when it went off, and it exploded in her hand.
But what we do know from doctors in Lebanon, the most typical injuries were on the hands and the face.
With the pagers, they were triggered in a way that they beeped for 10 seconds. And then after that, they exploded. So someone instinctively grabs for the pager to see what the message is in those 10 seconds, and it's in a position to cause the maximum amount of harm.
By far, the biggest gap in our understanding right now is in knowing how was this possible? How do you sabotage thousands of devices in enemy hands and rig them all to explode at very nearly the same time?
Israeli technical capability is extremely high. Their techniques and procedures for running operations, intelligence operations, are very high.
Early on, there were all kinds of theories.
Thinking twice about putting your phone in your pocket. That's perhaps the scariest thing about what's come out of Lebanon.
What today's cyber attack has proved to us is that they have the power to detonate our phones at any given moment. Could we all be carrying ticking time bombs in our pockets?
Do you remember the size of the explosion that I pointed out at the start? Most experts have discounted the idea that Israeli agents were somehow able to hack the pagers from afar, sending them some kind of signal that would overheat the battery and cause it to blow up.
You can't overheat thousands of batteries at the same time and have that type of simultaneous effect.
The size of the explosion itself, if it was just a battery, almost certainly would not have been nearly as consistent, nor nearly as big across the number of devices that we saw explode over 2 days.
No, according to Reuters, Israeli intelligence had been planning this attack for months. Their sources tell them the most likely explanation is that they managed to interrupt the supply chain, took control of a shipment of pagers, thousands of them, that they knew were destined for Hezbollah, and then fitted those pagers with explosives. According to Reuters, citing Lebanese sources, those explosives may have weighed as little as 3 grams. That's like a couple of paper clips, barely perceptible.
The ability to maybe create a front organization to infiltrate a supply chain, convince your adversary to trust you, and then be able to actually manipulate these devices and do it in such a way that it won't be detected and can just sit there and be used later. This shows a tremendous amount of kind of old school intelligence tradecraft and cutting edge technological capability as well.
Now, this has raised the question, who supplied the pagers? And this is where I think there's been a lot of early confusion. Witnesses and journalists were quick to point out branding on the pagers that suggested a Taiwanese manufacturer was the point of origin.
Taiwanese company.
Taiwanese brand. Gold Apollo, based in Taiwan.
But that company's president was quick to tell reporters, we didn't build those specific pagers. We just licensed our brand name to them. The actual manufacturers, they say, a company called BAC Consulting, based in Hungary. But in that case, too, the company denies making the pagers, the CEO stating that they, too, are just a middleman of sorts. And now, most recently, comes reporting from the New York Times that BAC Consulting was in fact a shell company that would pose as an international pager producer. It was part of an Israeli front, and that BAC did take on ordinary clients for which it produced a range of ordinary pagers, but the only client that really mattered was Hezbollah. If true, it would mean Israeli intelligence didn't just interrupt the supply chain. They were the supply chain. But why pagers, you might ask? Well, because Hezbollah famously renounced the use of cell phones. Too easy to track, especially against an enemy in Israel known for its cyber capabilities. Hezbollah's leader even told his followers this past February about their cell phones, please break it, bury it, lock it up in a metal box.
The use of cell phones by Hezbollah members has frankly led to an enormous amount of being able to easily track them by Israel. And so that's fostered a level of paranoia among Hezbollah leadership that's created a situation that they felt the best way to handle this was to take a low-tech strategy, to use pagers which could not be geolocated in the same way.
And this isn't just a perceived threat about spying. Hezbollah militants will be acutely aware of what happened in 1996, when Israeli intelligence planted 15 grams of explosives in a phone given to Hamas's chief bomb maker. The plan worked. He received a call, picked up the phone, and once a plane overhead was able to listen in and confirm it was him, the phone was detonated, killing him instantly.
Now that we've seen that neither the cell phones are safe for Hezbollah, nor the pagers and the walkie-talkies, it's going to create quite a conundrum about how Hezbollah feels is actually a safe way to meaningfully communicate.
So what happens next? Well, there are a couple of things. The most immediate question is how might this inflame tensions, not just between Israel and Hezbollah, but with Iran as well? Remember, Iran's ambassador to Lebanon was among those injured.
Nasrallah addressed the country earlier today, saying Israel crossed red lines by carrying out the attacks.
He called it an act of war. He called it an act of terrorism, a massacre. He used very strong language in many different ways. He did reserve the right to retaliate, though he didn't say when or how that was going to happen.
And one other thing, we also don't know what this does in the immediate term for the prospect of a ceasefire in Gaza. Because it's a fair question to ask whether Israel's attacks deter their enemies or only serve to embolden them.